Monday morning. The sky was gray with clouds. Not raining, not shining. Outside the headquarters of Graham and Sons, a sleek, modern building with sharp-edged architecture and reflective glass panels matching the color of the sky, a beige delivery truck sat like it had somehow missed the rhythm of a world moving too fast. The driver was a gray-haired man in a faded flannel shirt and well-worn khakis. He stepped out, adjusted the brim of his cap like a ritual from a past life. In his hand, a delivery manifest. Printed at the top was a simple name: Eli Graham. No one noticed. No one asked. Because in a world where value is measured by the shine on your shoes, the number of shares your concept gets on Behance, or the punch of a quote next to a designer chair, a man delivering reclaimed wood didn't belong. Graham and Sons used to be iconic, a handcrafted American furniture brand that had risen from a garage behind an auto shop in Portland, where the smell of oak soaked into your sweater and sawdust under your nails meant you'd done something real. It was founded by Elias Graham himself, a craftsman, a mentor, a CEO, a table wiper, and the man who first handwrote the employee code of ethics in pencil on a pine board. But that was 25 years ago. Today the name remained, but what was left was only the shell. Elias had known it the day he signed the papers to step down from the executive board 6 years earlier, after a merger he once believed would help the company soar. What he didn't anticipate was that they'd soar without him. They wanted to erase the past, to redefine the brand. They wanted a fresh start that required forgetting where they started. When he entered the building, the first thing Elias saw was how the lobby had changed. Where there once stood the Wall of Founders, a hand-carved oak wall bearing the names of those who had built the company alongside him, now there was a large pane of glass with shiny metal letters spelling, "Reimagine everything." He stood still for a moment, not out of sadness, but to make sure he wasn't dreaming. The names once engraved were gone without a trace, not even a leftover etch mark. Elias reached out and gently placed his hand on the glass, his palm meeting the cold of a new world. Behind him, someone called out loudly, "Hey, sir, mind stepping aside for guests to pass?" He moved to the side, nodded slightly, and realized the voice belonged to a young intern in a pale blue blazer, hair slicked back like he'd just come from a photo shoot. The kid had no idea who he was. And maybe he didn't need to, because here, anything old was just dead weight slowing down growth. Elias said nothing. He headed into the furniture warehouse behind the showroom, where materials were stored. A longtime delivery worker named Malik accepted the shipment. "White oak from Salinas?" Malik asked. Elias nodded and handed over the manifest. "Don't think I've seen you on this route before?" Elias smiled. "Just covering for a friend." Malik didn't pry. Everyone assumed he was a new temp, and like every temp, he was told to go around back, not to use the main elevator, and to wait until a manager gave the green light before moving materials in. Elias waited. No complaints. That was how he used to teach others. Let the air speak for you. As he pushed the wood cart past the design section, Elias paused briefly. Not because he was tired, but because he saw something familiar. A hand-sketched drawing on a desk, soft curved lines forming a chair back, reinforced with tiny wooden slats. A modern reworking of the Graham chair #1, the very model he had crafted by hand at 31. But oddly, this sketch had been crossed out in red ink. Beside it, a scribbled note read, "Not contemporary enough." Elias didn't smile, but in his eyes was a silence that defied explanation. He glanced around and quietly moved on. At the desk sat a young woman, loose brown hair, round glasses, a gray sweater and worn jeans. Her name was June Morales. She was a new intern, recently admitted to the design team through an art scholarship. During her interview, June had said she believed furniture wasn't just functional, it held living memory. The comment had made one panelist chuckle. "Memory doesn't pay studio rent, sweetheart." Still, she was hired, because they needed someone to fetch and carry, not a philosopher. When June noticed the delivery man looking at her drawing, she flushed and quickly covered it with another sheet. Elias simply nodded. "You drew that yourself?" She nodded. "I was just experimenting, inspired by some old chair designs I saw in the archives." Elias asked softly, "They didn't like it?" She gave a dry smile. "No. They said it's outdated, old-fashioned, Doesn't fit luxury markets. Modern people want angles, not feelings. Elias stayed quiet. A beat later he asked, "Do you still believe in that chair?" She hesitated, then replied, "I don't know anymore. Maybe I just miss my grandfather." Elias said nothing. He placed a wooden plank gently on the table and continued pushing his cart. Upstairs in the third-floor conference room, the Monday morning meeting was in full swing. Veronica Dale, the creative director, stood in a white suit presenting the rebranding strategy on a large screen. Gary Lane, the COO, sipped his coffee and nodded constantly. One slide showed a new chair, sharp-edged, chrome legs, faux leather upholstery. "We're not designing to evoke nostalgia. We design to make people feel expensive," Veronica emphasized. No one objected. The only one late was June, summoned last minute after helping with deliveries. She didn't dare speak, but as she passed, she saw Elias standing in the hallway, watching the meeting through the frosted glass. They met eyes for a second. Elias tilted his head slightly. She nodded back. Later that afternoon, Elias returned to the delivery area. He left a small note on June's desk. On it, written in pencil, was a single line. "There's nothing outdated about care." At the bottom, a simple initial, E. June read it and kept it. She didn't know why, but something about that handwriting gave her peace, as if someone who had once believed the same thing was quietly telling her not to let go too soon. At 7:10 p.m., as lights dimmed across the building, Elias left. He didn't look back. But as he passed the large glass wall in the lobby, where the Wall of Founders used to be, he paused for a moment. In the faint light, his reflection appeared on the surface. Blurred, indistinct, like a memory scrubbed from an era no one remembered. Elias touched the glass again, not to feel it, but to measure the distance between a founder and the place that once called him home. And as he stepped out the door, the truck's headlights cast a glow on the empty wall behind. No one noticed. No one turned around. But Elias knew some things don't need to be carved into walls because they're already etched into wood, into hands, into memory. And sooner or later, the wind always circles back. Tuesday morning, a light mist cloaked the back entrance of the operations workshop behind Graham & Sons headquarters. The streetlights hadn't fully shut off yet when Elias Graham, still going by Eli, stepped out of his old truck, carrying a bundle of walnut wood planks tied together with handmade rope. The wood was still damp, its grain raised and even, carrying the sharp, earthy smell of soil after rain. He lifted them gently onto the transfer rack, then wiped his hands with a cloth like a private ritual. Around him, no one paid attention. Other white delivery trucks arrived one by one, each bearing neat labels, printed manifests, and drivers wearing wireless earbuds as they scanned QR codes on each shipment. Elias had no printed ID, no barcode, just a worn leather notebook and a half-sharpened pencil. Still, he didn't rush. People who once worked with their hands never hurried. They believed that everything, even silence, deserved to be shaped carefully. At around 8:15, June Morales entered through the side door, arms clutching a rolled-up design sheet, a look of hesitation flickering across her face. She had just left the morning meeting, where she'd presented her refined version of the classic chair design. Veronica hadn't said a word, only glanced at it before moving to the next slide. No criticism, no praise. That silence left June feeling like she was stranded in a crowded room where no one could see her. As she passed through the loading zone on her way back to the design studio, her eyes drifted across the new wood delivery and stopped on a familiar figure. Eli, was carefully stacking planks on the rack. There was something about his stillness that made her pause. "You're the guy from yesterday," she said gently, like testing the air. Elias looked up, squinting against the light coming through the window, then gave a small nod. "I remember you. The chair." She smiled softly, like someone picking up a familiar stone from an old road. "I kept the note you left," she said. "No one's ever said that to me here. Actually, no one's ever listened to me." Elias set the wood down, wiped his hands on his apron, and asked, "Do you often say what you really think?" She shook her head. "Not here. Everything already has a format. If you're different, they think you're unprofessional." Elias looked at her for a moment. "And the chair? Do you think it doesn't belong? June hesitated, then replied, No, I don't think it's wrong. Just wrong for right now. Or wrong for this place. Elias gave a faint smile. The things that don't feel timely often belong ahead, not behind. She laughed for the first time that day. Wow, deep words for a wood delivery guy. He nodded, offering no rebuttal. For over 20 minutes, they examined the newly delivered planks together. Few words, but a presence fully shared. Elias showed her how to spot stable knots, how to tap lightly and hear the tension, and why some pieces, though not visually appealing, made perfect structural backbones. June took notes in her notebook. She asked, Were you ever a carpenter? Elias replied, Once. A long time ago. She looked up, about to ask more, but instead shifted course. Have you ever had an idea rejected, even though you truly believed in it? Elias was silent for a few seconds, then said, I once had an entire chapter of my life rejected. June didn't fully understand, but she felt something deeply real in how he said it. She nodded slowly. I think I'm at the start of that chapter myself. That afternoon, when June submitted her drawing to the sample approval team, she was called into a private office by her team lead, a man named Hal. He had perfectly combed hair and a crisply ironed white shirt. Looking at her drawing, he said, June, I get that you're inspired, but here we don't design from emotion. We design to sell, not to tell stories. She said nothing. He continued, I need you to finalize the detailing on the urban shell model in the next 2 days. Don't waste more time on chairs from a museum. She left with the drawing in hand, fingers trembling slightly. Back at the materials depot, she saw Elias sitting on a wooden step near the back door, holding a plastic coffee cup, eyes distant. Been sitting here long? She asked. Elias looked over and smiled. Long enough to know you're not okay. June sat beside him, the wooden wall at their backs like a quiet kind of support. She told him about what happened in Hal's office. She didn't complain. She simply told the story. And Elias, true to the name of this chapter, listened. No interruptions, no advice, just small nods and moments where he looked away, as if giving her feelings their own space to breathe. What do you think happens when you keep working in a place where no one believes in what you believe? She asked. Elias replied, If you wait for them to believe before you start doing, you'll never start. June stayed quiet. He added, I once worked in a place so small, no one knew my name, but I kept working. One day they couldn't unsee me anymore. She looked at him like she was hearing a familiar song rearranged into something new. Do you think they might forget your name altogether? Elias looked straight through the glass door. One day they'll remember. No need to shout. Just keep showing up. After June walked away, Elias pulled a small piece of paper from his shirt pocket and began sketching with his pencil. It was a chair. The design resembled June's, but with subtle refinements. Unique joint work, delicately angled legs, a curved backrest creating natural tension without a single screw. It was the chair he once sat in while writing the original mission statement for Graham and Sons. That chair no longer existed, but his hands still remembered every proportion. And for the first time in years, he drew it again. Not to manufacture, but to rekindle something for someone else. The next day, June found a sketch slipped into the folder she'd left near the loading area. No name, no notes, just soft pencil lines and a small message in the lower left corner. Let function carry soul. She didn't know why it moved her so deeply, but she kept the sketch, like a secret code only she could read. And in one small corner of Graham and Sons, where everything was measured in deadlines, click rates, and break-even points, two people sat on the wooden steps once a day, unnoticed by all. But one spoke, and the other listened. Thursday, clear skies. Sunlight cut across the tall glass panes of the second-floor design studio, turning the space into a modern greenhouse, bright but cold. The only sounds were the rustling of paper, the tapping of keyboards, and the footsteps of an assistant distributing new catalogs. On the wall, a large screen displayed the heading, Design Review, Q4 Showcase Concepts. Veronica Dale walked in with the composure of someone just returning from a televised interview. Her eyes scanned the room, lips slightly pressed in a calculated pause. I want today's review to have zero traces of nostalgia. Show me the future, not memory. The opening line landed like a cold scalpel across the team's spirit. June Morales sat in the second row, holding her sketch, saying nothing. She wasn't wearing a blazer or a tight skirt like the other women in the room. She was still June, simple, steady, quietly holding on to the lines of the chair she had spent all night revising, guided by the subtle feedback she had taken from the anonymous sketch she received earlier that week. The version she was about to submit echoed the structural spine of the Graham chair #1, but modernized with jointed components instead of screws, and subtly angled legs that provided natural recline without the need for a cushion. It wasn't just a chair. To her, it was a memory of her grandfather, of a wooden porch, of the feeling of being heard in silence. And more than that, it was proof that design didn't need to shout to be seen. It just needed to be right. But right for whom and in what context? That wasn't a question she was yet allowed to answer. When it was her turn to present, June stepped up to the projection table, holding a large printed sketch. Veronica sat with one leg crossed, arm resting on her chair like an audience member awaiting drama, while Gary Lane stared into his tablet. June began slowly. I'd like to introduce a chair inspired by American handcrafted furniture from the 90s, but restructured for modern production scalability. She hadn't finished the sentence when Veronica cut in. The 90s? You mean the time when Amazon still sold books by mail? A few scattered chuckles from the back. June froze. No, I meant... Veronica smirked. I get it, but this is Graham & Sons 2025, not the Smithsonian Museum. Gary added without looking up, June, you're new. It's not a bad idea, but it disrupts the brand's aesthetic rhythm. Soft curves make customers think of backyards when we're going for penthouses. June looked down at her sketch, her voice softening. I just thought, emotion doesn't have to contradict luxury. Veronica raised an eyebrow. And how much do you plan to charge per unit of emotion? The words hit like a blade, splitting in half every ideal June had clung to. She looked down at the drawing, unsure whether to tuck it away or tear it up right then and there. No one waited for her answer. Veronica motioned for the next slide, a concept featuring a powder-coated metal chair with a flexible back shaped like wings. This is what clients want. This is what clients want. They want to show off, not reflect. June returned to her seat, clutching her sketch like someone who had just failed to prove that memory still had a place in the modern world. In that moment, all sounds in the room blurred except for her own breathing, slow, steady, trying not to tremble. At the end of the session, she returned to her desk without saying a word. The drawing was folded carefully and slipped into a paper tube like a guilty artifact. But on the way to the service elevator, she found herself unconsciously stopping at the lumber storage area, where Elias was cutting planks for a new order. He saw her and paused. Your sketch didn't get approved? June only shook her head. Elias didn't press further. He picked up a small piece of wood and carved a symbol into it with a hand tool, a circle enclosing a stylized chair, and beneath it the inscription, 1 to 1. Then he handed it to her. I made this the day I started my first job. They laughed too, but I kept it. June looked at the wood, then at him. Did you ever stop believing in your own drawings? Elias answered evenly. I've stopped believing in people before, but I've never stopped believing in the lines. She nodded. It was the kind of understanding that didn't need to be named, like two instruments in tune without needing to be tuned. That evening, June stayed late. She placed her original drawing on the desk, then laid Elias's sketch beside it. She studied them, compared them, adjusted a few lines, and carefully scanned the new version with her personal device. She didn't submit it. She didn't upload it. She just kept it. Because now that sketch wasn't something to be approved. It was her affirmation to herself, that if one day someone asked, what did you do when everyone said no? She could answer with a curve. Elias didn't leave early either. He stayed to sort the leftover wood bundles. While sweeping up, he quietly looked toward the design studio, where a single desk lamp was still on. He knew she was still in there, and he also knew she had never been alone, even if the world around her kept trying to convince her otherwise. And in a place that seemed to have forgotten the name of the one who had built it, there was still someone quietly holding on to every detail, every line, every breath, every bruise from rejection. As part of a living memory, Saturday morning, the city air had softened slightly after the previous night's rain. The streets were still quiet, a gentle breeze brushing through trees just beginning to change color. Early signs of a new season. Graham and Sons didn't open to customers on weekends, but the operations warehouse remained lit. In that quiet space, Elias Graham, or Eli as everyone called him, appeared right on time as usual. He wore a dark baseball cap, an old flannel shirt, and walked with steady, quiet steps, as if he had never left this place in all these decades. But today, he didn't head straight to the loading zone. Instead, he quietly slipped down a side corridor toward what used to be the entrance to the original production area, now sealed off behind a white wooden door, no nameplate, no signage, almost erased from the collective memory. The door creaked softly as it opened, as if startled by the unfamiliar touch after so many years. Inside was a room roughly 300 square feet, with a low ceiling, thick dust, and the scent of damp wood mixed with the smell of time itself. This had once been Workshop A, the first workspace Elias used back when he and 4 craftsmen worked out of a makeshift structure built from raw pine. The walls, once lined with plywood, were now mottled and stained. In the middle of the room stood a long table, with a few unfinished wooden frames and a small broken stool shoved to the side, as if someone had left in the middle of everything and never returned. Elias stepped inside, his gaze sweeping the room like someone flipping through an old journal. One so familiar, it didn't need to be read aloud. He walked to the tall shelf at the back of the room, where he used to store his first prototypes. His fingers slid lightly across stacked wooden boxes, caked with dust. One was jammed shut, but he remembered the trick. Twist the handle backward, then press gently. Inside were hand-drawn sketches of original chair models, most drawn in pencil, some smudged with coffee stains. Each sketch was a chapter, not just of a product, but of the road he had taken. Elias pulled one out, shook it lightly, blowing off the fine layer of dust. It was the Graham Chair #1, the original prototype, complete with detailed technical annotations along the margins. His handwriting remained slanted and firm, breathing the soul of a craftsman. At the bottom, the signature read, not CEO or founder, just Eli. He carefully flipped through several more sketches until he came across a small wooden box labeled Legacy Confidential. The edges were worn, the latch rusted, but he still managed to open it. Inside were labeled wood samples, a few old audio recordings on mini cassette tapes, and one photograph. A black and white shot of Elias and the original workshop team standing beside the prototype chair, all of them smiling, their hands still sticky with glue. Elias sat down on the broken stool, the box on his lap. In that moment, he was no longer the delivery guy sitting in a forgotten storage room. He was once again the heart of the whole system. A man who had once lived, loved, and poured everything he had into this place, now returned in a forgotten shell. After more than an hour, Elias closed the box and took one sketch with him, the third chair design, never manufactured, and slipped it into the leather pouch at his side. He stood, brushed the dust off his pants, and paused in front of a gray brick wall next to the wooden shelves. That wall had once held the founder's notes, a board where he used to write daily messages to his team by hand, reminders, quotes, or sometimes just words of thanks. Now the board was gone, leaving only 4 small square drill holes on the bricks. Elias touched one of them, smiling. No one remembered, but the wall hadn't forgotten. As he left the room, a young janitor mopping the hallway floor looked up, surprised. "Sir, did you go into the wrong room? That one's been abandoned." Elias nodded gently. "Yeah, just looking for a bit of old dust." The young man didn't ask further, returning to his mop. Elias stepped into the hallway, then looked back at the door. He didn't lock it. No need, because to him, that room had never truly been closed. On his way back to the shipping area, Elias passed by the design department. The lights were on. Inside, June Morales stood alone at her workstation, in front of a new sketch. Her chair design, but now with subtle refinements that closely resembled the sketch Elias had just taken from the archive. She was trying to recreate something she had never seen, but could somehow feel. Elias stopped, not entering, just standing outside, watching her pencil in the soft curvature of each line. A quiet moment, like watching a younger version of himself from 30 years ago. That night, Elias sat in his truck, flipping through the old sketch. He picked up his pencil and wrote a single line in the margin. Still waiting to be built. Then he folded the drawing carefully and slipped it into his document pouch. Outside, it had begun to rain again. The raindrops tapped gently against the windshield like the steady rhythm of memory. And inside Graham and Sons, an old door had just been reopened. Not to return to the past, but to remind the present that some things, even when buried, will always find their way back to the light. Monday. The atmosphere inside Graham and Sons had changed in a way no one could quite explain. Everything moved as usual. The large format printers ran nonstop, design teams murmured about materials and color palettes, and mid-level managers rushed through hallways as if falling a step behind meant falling completely off the radar. But those who had been around long enough, or those sensitive enough, could sense something different. A strange stillness, like the held breath before a strong wind. It was the day a special guest was visiting, one of the company's longtime clients. A man who had once placed large-scale orders for a string of high-end boutique hotels along the West Coast. This time, he wasn't just coming to talk about another order. He was here to approve the exclusive design that would be showcased in next month's exhibition, the event marking Graham and Sons' 25th anniversary. Veronica Dale had prepared meticulously for the visit. She ordered the showroom cleaned from top to bottom, reinstalled the vision-forward gallery, arranged fresh white-tone flowers, and had every ceiling light swapped out for soft golden fixtures to create a mood that was warm but premium. She handpicked 3 new chair models for display, 2 of which were collaborations with a renowned Italian designer, positioned prominently in the center of the showroom. June Morales was assigned to help with cataloging and organizing presentation materials, but was explicitly told not to engage with the client. Veronica had emphasized this in the morning briefing. We need to present unified professionalism. If you're not part of the lead team, stay in the background. And do not let any unapproved sketches slip out, not even accidentally. That last sentence was clearly aimed at June. She didn't respond, just nodded quietly and clutched the stack of folders to her chest. But inside the sketch tube she carried, alongside the approved designs, was another drawing, the same classic chair concept that had previously been rejected. Only now it had been refined down to every detail, shaped by the quiet mentorship of Elias, who had given her more than advice. He had handed back a piece of memory this company had forgotten. At 11 a.m., the client arrived. His name was Thomas Renwick, over 60, silver hair, dressed in an ivory linen shirt and classic leather shoes, carrying the quiet confidence of someone who preferred sipping wine in a timber cellar over a gold-plated bar. Renwick didn't rush. He moved slowly, observing each detail, letting his fingers run lightly over wooden surfaces as if listening for a response. When Veronica led him into the main display area, he nodded politely, listening as she presented each chair, each design collaboration, each international name drop. But his eyes didn't linger on anything for long, not until he walked past the rear section, where June was quietly organizing the sketches, did his gaze finally pause. In a brief moment, he turned and pointed to the sketch tube. May I see that? June was taken aback. Veronica quickly interjected. I'm sorry, Mr. Renwick, that's not part of today's catalog. But he raised a hand. I just want to take a look, if it's not too much trouble. Veronica, caught off guard, nodded hesitantly. June opened the tube, pulled out the sketch, and laid it on the table. It was the classic chair design, smooth contours, subtly angled legs, concealed joints, and a teardrop-shaped backrest. A piece that felt at once vintage and fresh, familiar and quietly daring. Renwick studied the drawing in silence for nearly a full minute. Then he asked, Who drew this? Veronica jumped in. It's an internal draft, hasn't been through the approval committee. But he asked again, this time looking directly at June. Did you draw this? She nodded. Her voice was barely audible. Yes, it's a version I developed based on an old hand sketch. Renwick smiled slightly. Whose sketch? June hesitated, then answered, I don't know the author's name. I just felt that it had soul. He nodded, turning to Veronica. I want this chair as the lead piece for my Quiet Corner collection. No changes. Veronica froze. Are you sure? The Italian model you mentioned? Nothing wrong with Italian chairs. Renwick cut her off. But what I'm looking for is a feeling. Something that makes you want to sit alone with a cup of coffee and think about a beautiful morning. Something my clients will remember, not something they'll photograph and forget. He turned back to June and handed her his card. When the prototype's ready, let me know. I'd like to pre-order 10. After Renwick left, the entire design room felt like it had turned to glass. No one spoke. Veronica said nothing. Gary Lane, who had been quietly standing in the back, remained silent. June stood in the center of the showroom, sketch still in hand. No applause, no congratulations. But she could feel the shift in the air, like the first breeze of a new season. Not strong enough to bend a branch, but enough for someone perceptive to notice. Something was beginning to move. Elias stood at a distance, hidden behind the doorframe. He didn't step in. He just watched the scene unfold like a man who had lived through it once, seeing a tiny seed push through the soil for the first time. No fanfare needed, just the knowledge that it was alive. That night, June placed the sketch into a separate box, then opened Elias's old draft again. She aligned the two sketches, line for line, and found them so perfectly synchronized that she had to pause and take a deep breath. Beneath the glow of her desk lamp, she wrote a line on the back of the new drawing. To the man who believed before anyone else did. No name, but the recipient would know. Wednesday, a light fog hung in the air, and sunlight barely filtered through the frosted glass of the third floor at Graham & Sons. In a small conference room behind the design area, June Morales sat across from Hal, the design team lead, and beside him was Sarah from HR. On the table sat a thin folder. No water, no notepads, no morning pleasantries. Only a tense stillness and the unmistakable sense that she hadn't been invited here for a conversation. Hal spoke first, his tone level, cold, like a steel countertop. June, we need to discuss your conduct during the client visit, specifically the presentation of a chair design that had not been approved and was not part of the official showcase catalog. June barely had time to respond before Sarah continued. We understand you may not have intended to break protocol, but as a result, the entire display plan had to be adjusted. The Italian model was removed from the spotlight, and the investor may now have expectations around a product that hasn't been vetted. June looked from one to the other, trying to keep her voice calm. But Mr. Renwick requested that model. I didn't offer it. He saw it and asked to see more. I only followed his lead. Hal leaned back, arms crossed. That's exactly when you need the judgment to say no. That's why you're still in the internship phase longer than others. June froze. Each word had been carefully chosen. Not shouted, not cruel, but cutting, like a razor held steady. Sarah pushed the folder toward her. Temporarily, you'll be transferred to the post-production department, reviewing digital print proofs, matching color specs, and assigning product codes. During that time, you'll step away from the concept team. June hesitated, hands clenched beneath the table. It was a soft demotion, not labeled as disciplinary, but enough to push her out of the creative current. No need to fire her, just let her fade, like an unwanted detail erased from a CAD rendering. June didn't argue. She simply asked, "What about the chair?" Hal met her gaze. It will be added to the catalog, after modifications by the review team. It'll be listed under the team name. No credit to me? She asked, her voice barely audible. Sarah responded gently. This is part of standardization. Individual names typically don't appear on product listings. June stood, folder in hand. Understood, she said without looking at either of them. On her way out, she didn't cry, but her shoulders slumped slightly, as though something heavier than a job title had been taken from her. Maybe her belief in fairness, or worse, her belief in herself. Elias saw her from the hallway. He didn't speak, just stepped slowly and quietly past her. She stopped. They said I was wrong, she said without preamble. They said I shouldn't let emotion get in the way of work. Elias turned back, his eyes without judgment. And you believe them? June looked at him, eyes red but voice steady. Number. But I'm getting tired. Elias nodded, then pulled a small piece of carved wood from his pocket. It bore the outline of the chair June had designed. They can take your name off the design, but they can't take the shape of the chair out of your hands. She held the wood, gripping it gently. If I walk away now, it becomes theirs forever, doesn't it? Elias said nothing. She didn't need an answer. She already knew. The next day, June sat in the post-production room, a windowless space with oversized printers and color boards lined up like library shelves. She keyed in data, tagged product codes, reviewed the technical outlines of designs she was no longer allowed to touch. She worked fast, no errors, but no one noticed. No one asked her anything. No one remembered that just 3 days earlier, she was the reason the company's biggest client had placed a pre-order. Meanwhile, Veronica was praised in the company's internal press briefing under the headline, Bold Vision in Visual Strategy. June's chair, now renamed the Curve 25, appeared as a flagship product, accompanied by a rewritten description from the creative team. Not a single word about emotion, not a single phrase about the idea of storytelling through form, only specs, materials, durability, and profit margins. Elias watched from a distance. He started arriving earlier, cleaning the warehouse faster and passing by the print department more often than usual. One day he slipped a handwritten note into the stack of materials June received. It contained only one line. They can't block the light if you keep it burning. No signature, no source. But she knew who it was from, and for the first time in a week, she smiled. That same day, Elias visited the office of a former colleague named Walter, a man who had once overseen the technical archive room and was now nearing retirement. Walter recognized Elias instantly, though he didn't say his name. They locked eyes for a moment, and Elias asked only, "You still have my old storage key?" Walter nodded, quietly pulling a key from a metal box beneath his desk. Not a word exchanged, but the look in Walter's eyes said more than language ever could. "I never forgot you." That night, Elias reopened the old archive room. This time he brought with him the officially stamped design for the Curve 25, the company's version, and placed it beside both his own hand-drawn sketch and June's original. He compared each line, each joint, each point of weight distribution. It was all still there, though polished, smoothed, and stripped of names. He looked at it for a long time, then wrote a single line on the back of the old drawing. "The soul is still here. All it takes is someone patient enough to find it." He knew the time to flip the table hadn't come yet, but it wasn't far off either. Friday afternoon, Graham and Sons entered the final working hours of the week with the characteristic sluggishness of offices that had kept their lights on all day. June Morales sat in the post-production room, fluorescent lighting above casting a pale tone on her skin, and the computer screen before her blurring under her tired eyes. She had just finished processing 78 color mock-ups, including designs labeled as the creative highlights of the design team. The same team where she once had a seat, a role, and a sense of belief. Now, she no longer felt like she belonged anywhere. Even though the Curve 25 chair she had created was being prepared for limited production as part of a major collection, her name had been erased from every official document. It was as if she had never existed, as if she had only passed through like a shadow, exactly how a system is designed to quietly erase what no longer fits. She stood up and stepped into the hallway. The late afternoon air had softened. The hallway was empty, unusually quiet. She intended to head straight for the shipping area, where she often ran into Elias, but just as she reached the side elevator, a soft voice called out from behind, "June!" She turned. It was Ethan, the young stockroom assistant who often helped her retrieve materials. He handed her a small wooden box, no larger than a laptop. "Someone left this and asked me to give it to you. No note, just your name on a label underneath." She looked at the box. Walnut grain, an old-fashioned clasp, and no company branding. A strange feeling rose in her chest. Not fear, but anticipation. June carried the box to a seldom-used technical room at the end of the hallway. She shut the door, set the box on the table, and opened the latch. Inside was a fabric-lined compartment with 3 items: a hand-rolled sketch tied with twine, a yellowed envelope aged by time, and a small piece of wood etched with the mark 1-to-1, identical to the piece Elias had once given her. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the sketch first. It was a chair design, not curved 25, but it had the same core structure, subtly sloped legs, a teardrop-shaped backrest, and nearly invisible joint connections. But the critical detail lay in the bottom corner of the drawing, where a handwritten signature read, Elias Graham. She collapsed into the chair behind her, heart racing. She recalled every conversation with Elias, the way he looked at sketches, the way he never claimed authority, the way he spoke the language of a craftsman more than that of an executive, and especially the look in his eyes when she asked about emotion in design. All of it returned like puzzle pieces, once scattered, now suddenly aligning. She opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, its paper faded, but the writing still clear. The opening line read, "If someone is reading this letter, you might be the only one left who remembers that this place began with a pair of hands, not a 3-year business plan." She read on, each line settling deeper in her chest. Elias described the early days when the company was still a small workshop, where he and a few craftsmen worked through cold mornings in a drafty warehouse, where every chair had a story and every sketch bore sweat. He wrote about the pain of having to sell his shares to save the company from collapse, and then being pushed out of the boardroom for being no longer aligned with the growth strategy. He didn't write with resentment. He wrote like someone who had let go, but still hoped that one day someone would remember why they began. She picked up the small piece of wood and turned it over. Carved on the back was the line between forgotten and erased is you. June sat in that room for a long time, still clutching the sketch and the letter. There was no doubt left. Elias Graham, the man she had only known as the delivery guy, was the very person who had laid the first stone for the entire company. The man whose name was once on the wall of founders. The man who had designed the soul of the chair she always thought she'd stumbled upon by accident. And now he was treated like a nameless contract worker. And above all, he had never once said a word. Not once. She walked out of the room carrying the wooden box. Inside her, something had cracked, and something else had started to form. It felt like discovering that your father had once been a musical genius, but had spent his life stacking blank paper at a printing shop, and you had just stumbled upon an unpublished composition. Overwhelming, painful, regretful, but most of all, awakening. She went to find Elias. He was sorting lumber in the warehouse. She approached, placing the box on his workbench. Elias looked up at her, his expression calm, as though he had known all along she would find it. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked, her voice nearly breaking. Elias replied without blinking, "Because saying it doesn't make it more true, and sometimes silence is the only way to see who still remembers what matters." Her voice wavered. "Then why are you still here? Staying on as someone with no name?" Elias turned back to the wood, stacking calmly. "Because I wanted to see, if I started again from a place where no one knew who I was, would the truth still be recognized?" June looked at him, not as a junior employee looking at an old woodworker, but as someone who had been lost and just found her map. "I remember. I won't let them erase your name." Elias said nothing, but for the first time in weeks, the corner of his mouth curved slightly. It wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a kind of quiet relief, as if, no matter how many times the world tried to forget him, there was at least one person who remembered. And sometimes one person is enough. The following Monday, June Morales arrived earlier than usual. The sun hadn't yet fully risen, and the lights on the 3rd floor of Graham and Sons were still off, but she was already there, walking with a different kind of energy. Not excitement, not urgency, but a quiet determination, the kind people carry when they decide to start over, not because they're forced to, but because they can't not. From the moment she opened the wooden box and read Elias's letter, something inside her had changed. She no longer wanted to rise above. She wanted to pull back, not just to reclaim fairness for herself, but for someone who had been erased from history by the very hands now reaping the rewards of what he built. She started in the most logical place, the internal design archive room, where prototype drawings, author credits, and product data were stored digitally. Every employee had a personal ID linked to the designs they'd contributed to. She knew the system well. She'd learned it during her early internship weeks. But when she searched for Elias Graham, the result came back. No records found. She tried variations. E. Graham, Eli Graham, even founder ID. Still nothing. The system was blank, as if that name had never been entered. She shifted to searching for Founder's Wall, the honorary display that once stood in the main lobby. She remembered it like a whispered story passed down by older staff. But in the digital showroom archive, there were no images of that wall. No documentation photos, no captions, no metadata. Only the first picture after the redesign. A blank glass panel bearing the words, "Reimagine everything." As if by design, nothing had been left behind for future eyes to compare. She didn't give up. She went to Walter, the technical archive staffer Elias had once visited. He was sorting large format prints, slow and methodical, like someone who understood the value of time. When June asked about the Founder's Wall, he paused, looking up at her with eyes that had seen more than they ever revealed. Yes, it used to be there. White oak, hand-carved. Each name was a chapter, not for fame, but to remember who was there when it was all still empty. "Who took it down?" she asked. He hesitated, then answered, "I don't know exactly. Just remember one morning, it was gone." Gary said, "Brand refresh." I asked if they saved it. He said, "It's all stored digitally." But when I checked, nothing. "Who carved the names?" she asked. Walter's lips curled faintly. "Elias. Every Monday morning, one name at a time." She thanked him, then spoke with a group of older employees, among them, Linda, who had once been a logistics assistant back when the company was just a workshop. Linda remembered, very clearly. "He was always the last to leave the shop every night. I remember one time I forgot my bag, came back close to midnight, and the lights were still on. He was washing his hands, looked tired, but smiled anyway. I asked, 'Why are you still here?' He said, 'Some glue needs to set from the inside.' I think now I understand what he meant." June documented everything, each account, each piece, as if threading together a distorted painting. Every witness, every memory, every old hand-sketched drawing she found in the back storage added another layer of color to the portrait of Elias Graham. Not as some former boss, but as someone who never really left. Then she visited the maintenance room, a place rarely entered unless something was broken. There she found a plastic box labeled "Old Lobby, Decommissioned Materials." Inside, buried among scraps of wood and paint dust, were broken fragments from the old Founder's Wall. One piece still bore a partial engraving, "Lias Grar." The rest had been shattered. She picked it up, her hand trembling. Not because the piece was valuable, but because someone had gone to great lengths to make sure it no longer existed. And somehow she had found it. And she knew, when a name is erased intentionally, remembering isn't sentiment, it's responsibility. She brought the wooden fragment back to her desk and placed it beside Elias's drawing. Under the light, it was painfully clear. The same hands that once built the product were now treated like a shadow. And she understood this. If she stayed silent, Elias would continue being erased. Not just from records, but from collective memory. That night, she wrote an email. She didn't send it, but she drafted it, addressed to Gary, CCing Veronica. The content was simple. Regarding the Curve 25 model, I have reason to believe the core structural design originated with Elias Graham, founder of Graham & Sons. I have documents and witnesses. If necessary, I am willing to present everything in detail. She didn't send it. Not yet. Because she knew, in this kind of battle, evidence alone wasn't enough. She needed timing. She needed the right stage. And that moment was getting closer with each passing day. Friday, 6 p.m., the headquarters of Graham & Sons was more elaborately decorated than ever before. On the marble lobby floor, silk banners hung from the ceiling, embossed in gold lettering, 25 years of design excellence. Everything had been choreographed to perfection, from the stage lighting, programmed to match each speech cue, to the soft, ambient music carefully woven into the slideshow transitions. The atmosphere was taut like an awards night, only this wasn't for cinema. It was for design legacy, a legacy that few remembered had ever begun with one man. Veronica Dale, the creative director, stood behind the curtain, adjusting the lapels of her pearl-toned blazer while skimming her prepared remarks. No more than 7 minutes, she reminded herself. Lead into the hero chair slide. Add a hint of inspiration. Emphasize the new design philosophy. Do not mention the old man. Beside her, Gary Lane stood with his assistant, discussing how to welcome an investor delegation from the East Coast. Both wore the confident faces of people convinced the script was locked and every variable accounted for. The auditorium slowly filled. On white-draped chairs sat guests in tuxedos and evening gowns, designers, journalists, collectors, and representatives from global furniture firms. Near the back row sat an older man, dressed in a faded ash-gray shirt, worn khaki pants, and scuffed leather shoes. He said nothing. No one noticed him. No one had invited him. Elias Graham didn't need an invitation. He only needed to be there, like a shadow beneath the spotlight, to hear what the company he built would say about the things they now called legacy. After introductions, the lights dimmed. Veronica stepped onto the stage. Every step was precise, her voice even and clear. We began with a sketch, not just any sketch, but one that dared to defy the safe path. And from a single curve no one accepted, we created a brand that touches emotion. She signaled, and the screen behind her displayed the centerpiece. The curved 25 chair, smooth contours, real wood grain, soft lighting accentuating each detail. This chair, Veronica said, represents our new vision, where the past isn't discarded, but reimagined in bolder, deeper, and... She paused as rehearsed for the musical shift. More commercial ways. Applause followed. Not thunderous, but measured, just enough to affirm she'd kept the story on track. But then a voice rose from the audience. May I ask, who actually designed that chair? Everything halted. The question came from a journalist with Form and Function magazine, a man invited to observe, not usually to speak. His question stopped Veronica mid-breath. She smiled lightly and stepped forward with the mic. That chair was the result of a collaborative effort from our internal design team, under my direct supervision. But before she could finish, someone else stood up from the center row. It was June. She wore a dark blue button-up shirt, no dress, no glitter, but her voice cut through the room louder than any spotlight. Excuse me, I need to clarify. The original sketch for that chair was based on an old design, one that was never officially recognized, and the person who laid its foundation is here tonight. A chill swept across the room. Veronica gripped the mic tighter. June, I don't think this is the time. No one said it was the time, June replied, her voice steady but not loud. But if we don't say it now, then it will never be the time. She stepped calmly onto the stage, pulling a hand-drawn sketch from her folder, the one Elias had left in the box. This is the original drawing. At the bottom is the signature of Elias Graham, the founder of Graham & Sons. This was sketched nearly 30 years ago. I found it, along with witnesses, a handwritten letter, and a never-manufactured prototype. So I ask, if legacy is what this company is celebrating, why isn't the name of the man who began it being spoken here tonight? Silence, the kind that empties a room of all its sound. Veronica didn't move. Gary stepped from the wings, ready to say something, but no one was looking at him. All eyes were now on the man at the back of the room. Elias, still seated. June turned toward him. If you don't come up here, they'll never believe me. Elias didn't stand right away, but then slowly he pressed his hands to the arms of the chair and rose. He walked the aisle step by step, and with every step the room murmured, then hushed, like waves cresting, then pulling back. When he reached the stage, June handed him the sketch. He took it, stood before the microphone. No spotlight, no soundtrack. Just him, a man erased from this story, now standing in the middle of it. He said one sentence. I didn't come here to reclaim my name. I came to make sure that when you speak of beginnings, you don't begin with a lie. No applause, no laughter. No one left the room. The entire auditorium was held still, not by force, but by a truth so obvious no one had dared face it. June stepped back, looking at him. Elias turned to her, nodded, not in thanks, but in recognition. She had done what the entire system had avoided. She had brought the truth back to where it belonged. On the main stage of Graham and Sons, the spotlight no longer followed the brand ambassador. It no longer tracked the program flow of the event schedule. It stood still, clear, unflinching, casting directly onto Elias Graham. He didn't need a podium. He didn't need background music or a formal introduction. All he needed was a look, and the room knew. This wasn't part of the program. This was part of the truth. Gary Lane stood off stage, face taut as wire. Veronica maintained a professional expression, lips pressed, eyes unreadable, her hands clutching the folded script now wrinkled and pointless. June Morales stood off to the side, still holding the hand-drawn sketch Elias had made all those years ago. The sketch she once thought belonged to no one. Now everything had a name, and that name had never disappeared. Elias took the mic. His hand didn't tremble. His voice was low, steady, deliberate. I didn't come here with a plan. I didn't come with a speech. I wasn't on the guest list. But I do have something no one else has dared say tonight. The chair you're applauding, it didn't begin with this year's creative spark. It began on a rainy day in a woodshop in Portland when I sat alone trying to design something my mother could lean back in without needing a cushion. The room fell completely silent. At that time, I wasn't a CEO. I didn't have a design degree. I held no international certifications. I had two hands, a few leftover planks, and a belief that furniture wasn't just for sitting, it was for remembering. I built this company not with a branding campaign, but by sitting beside every craftsman and asking if they were tired, asking what they needed to do better. Every early product of Graham and Sons passed through my hands, and I'm more proud of that than anything your current system could ever record. He paused, scanning the audience gently, as if to see whether those who once looked past him were finally looking back. And they were. Some had recognized him. Others looked stunned. A few, older attendees with memories of the original workshop, nodded quietly. No proof needed. Sometimes all it takes is for a person to stand in the right place, and you know they belong there. Elias continued. I don't blame the company for evolving. Growth is life, but I do ask, what's the point of living if you have to deny the person who gave you life? The wall of founders, where my name and the names of my earliest collaborators once lived, was taken down without explanation. My name vanished from your archives. My drawings were buried in the non-viable files. I accepted being forgotten, but I will not accept being rewritten as if I never existed. Veronica stepped forward as if to interrupt. Elias turned toward her, not with anger, but with a calm as cold as marble. You don't need to protect the brand. The brand doesn't need protection. It needs to be remembered properly. You may run the show, but I built the first seat, the one with no metal legs, no epoxy gloss finish, no marketing. But it had a soul, and if you want to keep that soul in the products you sell, then say the name of the man who started it. Applause broke out, not from the entire room, but from those who had once witnessed it, those who had worked beside Elias, or simply those who felt something inside them being set right. And then something happened that wasn't in any script. Mr. Thomas Renwick, a longtime client, stood up. I can confirm this. In 1999, I sat in a handmade chair Elias built in the Portland shop. I bought 12 of them for my first hotel. And when I requested the Curve 25, it was because that feeling came back. He turned to the event organizers. I will not continue our partnership unless the founder is publicly recognized at this 25-year celebration. Veronica went pale. Gary had no options left. There was nothing left to spin. No polished version of the story could cover up the presence of the very man whose hands had built the truth, validated not by a press release, but by the chair itself. Elias didn't wait for an apology. He didn't need applause to know he was right. He stepped down from the stage, walking past Veronica without a glance, heading straight to the back of the room. Before exiting the auditorium, he stopped at the spot where the founder's wall used to stand. Now it was just a cold glass panel. He placed his hand on it. quietly. No one said a word, but everyone saw. And this time, they would not forget. The next morning, the headquarters of Graham and Sons lit up earlier than usual. But this time, the lights didn't just illuminate boardrooms. They stretched into hallways, the loading dock, the design studio, as if every corner of the building was asking itself, did last night really happen? The night when, on the 25th anniversary stage, the man erased from company history appeared, introduced himself without a mic, and walked out without waiting for applause. No slam fists, no rallying slogans, just a sentence, a look, and a hand placed on what used to be the Wall of Founders. And somehow that silence shattered the years-long quiet. That morning's internal bulletin couldn't ignore it. It mentioned that Elias Graham, the original founder of the company, had attended the event. The language was careful, calling him things like honorary founder, a figure from the early days. But no one who read it could miss the truth. They were rewriting something they once tried to erase. Meanwhile, in the design community online, a photo of Elias standing beside June, holding the original sketch with the curved 25 chair in the background, spread like wildfire. A caption, origin unknown, read, "Turns out the quietest guy in the building was the one who built it." In the comments, stories poured in. Former employees recounted how Elias used to carve their names into prototype armrests to remember who contributed. Customers shared how he once personally delivered a piece when a staff member fell ill. A former engineer wrote, "I left when they stopped listening. Glad someone made them hear again." At the office, June Morales was no longer isolated. People who used to avoid her in elevators now nodded as they passed. One colleague, who had previously dismissed her sketch as nostalgic nonsense, left a note on her desk. "I was wrong. You were right from the start." June didn't reply. She simply opened her locker, took out Elias's original drawing, and placed it on her desk. Openly, deliberately, a quiet affirmation that she no longer needed to hide the legacy she was continuing. In the production wing, a group of craftsmen, men who rarely spoke up in concept meetings, requested to return to the original Curve 25 prototype, unpolished, uncoated, unmodified. "We want to do it exactly like the first hand-drawn version," one of them said. "If this is the chair that starts it all over, then let it carry the real scratches." Gary Lane called an emergency executive meeting. His face was tense, no longer calm. "We need to manage the narrative. Sentiment is just a short-term effect. People are romanticizing a past that doesn't fit today's pace." But this time, Veronica said nothing. She didn't agree. Her expression wasn't defiant, just uncertain, because even she, without saying it, had begun to realize what she'd built in the name of modernization was trembling beneath something she never imagined could be so disruptive: memory. Meanwhile, in the old side workshop, where Elias had once quietly cleaned, sketched, and exchanged fragments of thought with June, a curved 25 chair sat in the center. No rope barriers, no placard, no protective glass. Anyone could sit, and they did. Staff who used to lounge only on the executive series now took turns trying the classic chair. They noticed its gentle lean that released the back instead of locking it. The armrest rested at writing height, not just for show. The seat, usually padded, was made of flexible natural wood that responded to body temperature. No one needed convincing. They could feel it. One afternoon, a group of interns who had never heard the name Elias before found him in the back warehouse. One girl asked, "Could you show us the first sketch?" Elias wasn't surprised. He pulled out an old sheet from a drawer and spread it across the wooden table. They leaned in like it was a treasure map. A boy in the group asked, "Do you want to remake the first chair?" Elias simply smiled. "I don't need to. It's enough that you do." And so they began. The interns proposed opening a small space in the workshop, calling it the Quiet Table, where any employee, no matter their level, could design whatever they wanted without approval. No KP is, no presentations, just truth. Gary objected, but Veronica didn't. For the first time, she said, "If we don't even dare let them try again, we don't deserve to sell anything with the Graham name." The following week, Elias was absent for 3 days. No one knew where he went. But when he returned, he brought a small wooden box, with inside a chair plank engraved with his signature from 30 years ago. He said nothing. He simply mounted it on the wall next to the workshop entrance. Below it, a small plaque read, "The chair that changed everything." No spotlight, no ceremony. But everyone who walked by paused, not because it was beautiful, but because they knew something real was finally changing. March. The air was crisp but clear, and the early spring sunlight poured across the glass facade of Graham and Sons like a thin coat of primer on old wood. Not flashy, not loud, but just enough to show that a new season had begun. Inside, everything looked unchanged at first glance. Design teams met on schedule, the workshop ran steadily, and the showroom welcomed clients by appointment. But if you look closer, you'd notice something different. The way people moved through the hallways. They didn't rush with their heads down anymore. They looked around, they paused, and every now and then, they listened. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no grand speech, no inspirational slideshow. But that morning, a new wall appeared, not in the main lobby, but in the hallway leading to the old workshop, the place where it all began. A raw oak wall, unpolished, with grain marks left untouched. Hand-built by the same interns who once sat beside Elias to learn how to set a chair leg without screws. On this wall, there were no revenue milestones, no certificates, no campaign posters. There were only names. Names of those who were there first. Names of those who stayed silent. Names of those who had once been forgotten. At the center, hand-carved into the wood, Elias Graham, the one who started with nothing but a chair. Below that, a small engraved quote, the very words Elias spoke during the exhibition. "Don't rewrite history. Sit with it." Veronica was the first executive to sign the proposal for the wall. Not out of pressure, but because she had come to understand that the only thing that keeps a brand truly alive is honest memory. Not slick presentations, not clever taglines, but knowing that somewhere, someone, when they sit in your product, feels seen. As for Elias, he didn't show up that morning. He didn't attend the board meeting either. He left a sealed envelope in June's drawer. Inside it, just a slip of paper and a half-sharpened pencil. The note read, "You remembered." That was enough. And then he left. No one saw him walk out of the building. There were no farewells. But from that day on, people began noticing a chair in the middle of the workshop floor, the original Curve 25, untouched, unpainted, unbranded, no plaque, no name tag, just a small wooden sign beside it. For the last one to leave, if you need to sit for a while. June became head of design within a year, but she never placed her name on any blueprint. Instead, she proposed a new system. Every design would carry the name of the first person to sketch it, even if it was just a doodle. And the quiet table program, where any employee could design freely, without approval, became part of the company culture. Once per quarter, everyone would gather with no laptops, no printers, just paper, pencils, wood, and one question. Does this make someone want to sit down? The new wall of honor didn't sparkle. It wasn't spotlighted, but everyone who passed it paused, not because it was pretty, but because they knew. Those names had once been erased, and now they stood tall. No need for explanation, no need for volume, just presence. Elias's story spread beyond the design world. Other companies began tracing back the names of their forgotten founders, first craftsmen, and overlooked workers. The hashtag number sign "Sit with History" became a quiet trend, not viral but resonant. People stopped asking only, "Who made this?" and started asking, "Who wasn't mentioned when this was made?" Graham and Sons didn't change their slogan, but a small line began to appear on the underside of each new product, printed so small only those who sat would ever notice. Designed to remember. Sometimes the only thing a person needs isn't recognition. It's not to be erased from the story they gave their life to build. If you've ever been overlooked, if you've ever quietly built something, only to watch others rename it and take the credit, then this story is for you. Elias never had to raise his voice. He simply sat down and let the chair speak for him. And sometimes a single chair, made right, can change an entire system. If something stirred in your heart while watching this, like this video, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the stories no one else is telling, and leave a comment below, because someone out there might need to read exactly what you say. Share this video with someone who's ever been forgotten, because sometimes all it takes is one person remembering to rewrite an entire memory.